Microsoft made two big announcements last week. First was a partnership with Meta. Microsoft's cloud computing platform Azure will start hosting Meta's new AI model called Llama 2. Like OpenAI's GPT-4, Llama 2 is a large language model that allows developers to train and build their own AI products. The model will be available on other platforms like AWS and Hugging Face, but Meta has announced that Azure is its preferred partner. Microsoft's second announcement was the pricing of its new AI tool, Microsoft 365 Copilot. As a part of Microsoft's productivity software, Copilot can summarize your emails or turn a Word doc into a PowerPoint presentation. Now, it won't be available to consumers at launch, but business customers paying for Microsoft 365 will have access to Copilot for an extra $30 per user per month. After that announcement, Microsoft rose 4%, reaching an all-time high and adding $154 billion in market value in just one day. Scott, your thoughts?
Satya Nadella is arguably the most successful venture capitalist in history.
Yeah.
So Satya made a $1 billion investment and then a $10 billion. Greatest VC investment arguably in history, maybe with the exception of Jack Ma investing, I think it was $50 million at Alibaba, and it turned out being 20 or 30 billion. Anyway, this is extraordinary. And what I would say is that, and this circles back to the writer strike, Fran Drescher should be picketing outside of Redmond, Washington, not outside of Netflix or Paramount Studios. You got to get to the biggest pile of money. All the money being made here, where does AI get, what is the coal, what is the grist that goes into these LLMs? Mm-hmm. Other people's content. Mm-hmm. And there is no way that these models aren't scanning, digesting, and learning from a massive amount of content that these studios and these artists and these writers, even images, have been informed by makeup artists. I think that is absolutely the pile of money they need to be going after here. Think about this. Microsoft added the value of essentially Disney in one day. It added the value almost of Netflix. If you take out Disney and Netflix, Microsoft in one day added all of Hollywood, yep. All of it and more. And so if they're benefiting, which I believe they are, from the incredible content, that's their focus. That should be their focus. They should join hands with Ted Sarandos. They should join arms with Ted Sarandos and Bob Iger, and they should march towards Redmond. Mm-hmm. That is the enemy here. That is the enemy. And so I remember I consulted or coached or advised, whatever you want to call it, Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour. And they'd all want to talk about gaining advantage against one another. I'm like, come on, you're competitors, but your enemy is also in Seattle, and it's called Amazon. Mm-hmm. And you should be presenting a united front against Amazon, not going after each other. Yep. Anyways, the numbers here are staggering. They're just staggering. When you think about where the money is, where the value is to be extracted, it's from technology. It's not from the studios.
Yeah.
I think the WGA, the SGA, SAG-AFTRA, and all the studios should have their own technologists right now. Yep. Finding the millions and billions of instances where this LLM, yep. where this generative AI tool clearly was informed by the content and creativity of their members and their product. And they would claim, oh, it's fair use, or it's already out in the public domain. And I would hire the biggest, scariest lawyers in the world. I would start giving money to every politician and say, you have big tech eating our lunch, mm-hmm. taking our lunch, borrowing our watch, and then telling us what time it is. And they need to stop. And I would be filing suits, and I would then come to some sort of accommodation with the deepest pocket in the world, and that is technology, and say, if you want to continue to crawl our content to inform your LLMs, which you are doing millions, if not billions of times a day, we have to come to some sort of agreement where if you can increase the value of your company by $154 billion in a day, we, the studios, and the creators, and the actors, and the makeup artists, and the gaffers, and the writers get to share in that. Because for Microsoft to give up, for Microsoft, Meta, OpenAI to give up a tiny portion of the incremental revenues and value they're going to create is much greater than, quite frankly, taking it hard to Bob Iger and David Zaslav. They're more they're riper or more popular targets because it's easier to understand. But if they want to be effective versus right, and that's something I've struggled with my whole life, okay, they're right to complain about the studio heads making too much money. But okay, the top 10 actors make too much money too. You need to go after where your content is creating the most value such that you can extract some of that value. And by far, if you get a tiny slice of the value that tech is going to create off of your sweat and your creativity, you are going to end up in a much better place than if you're able to extract a pound of flesh from the studios. You're in this together. You have picked the wrong enemy. You are Native American tribes warring against each other when the real enemy is the British or whoever it was who came in and performed, or Americans actually, genocide on Native Americans. You are fighting the wrong enemy. You're allies in this fight. You want to go after the deepest pocket in history, and that is the technology that is leveraging generative AI, who is crawling your content. This is your Google moment where I fucked up and the board of the New York Times fucked up. We were so enamored with Google that we let them crawl our data, and they gave us a nickel for every dollar they generated off of our journalism. Don't make that mistake again. This is that moment here and now.
It feels like the path that you're going down is sort of the data property rights path. And, you know, there have been a lot of legislative proposals in the past. The first one that comes to mind is the data dividend, which is the notion that tech companies use our data to train their models and to train their algorithms. And that's, quote unquote, our sweat that they're profiting off of. And therefore, we should get a slice of it as just general content creators. Would you take it that far? Do you think that that's where we're headed?
Well, the model here is in Australia. The Australian government said Facebook is where people are getting their news, but the people actually collecting the news and spending money on it and risking their lives sometimes to collect this news aren't getting compensated. Yeah. So they passed a law and said, okay, Meta, you've got to give a portion of your revenues generated in Australia back to journalists. And they huffed and puffed and threatened to leave Australia. Same thing's kind of going on in Canada right now. And they ended up paying them $150 million a year. Mm-hmm. And this is good for business. It's good for society because we need more journalists. And I think something similar should happen here. I don't know if it should be regulation. I'd like to think we can accomplish a private market solution through the right to assemble and the right to organize, which unions have. But, I mean, there's this giant sucking sound of relevance and capital from Hollywood to the Valley right now. Mm-hmm. And they need to get in the way of that airflow instead of warring with each other. But there's absolutely, if your stock goes up $154 billion in one day because you announced a subscription AI model, and you're informing that model, a little bit of that goes a long way towards paying your writers and your makeup artists.
Going back...
Let me run the union. Look for the union dog label. I'm ready. Learn from my mistakes.
Right after you dragged them in a blog post. Going back to the AI models themselves.
And I want to guest. All I want is a guest appearance on The Real Housewives. I want to be the pervy neighbor.
Play. Yeah.
The pervy neighbor. God, that guy creeps me out. Oh, yeah, that's Professor G. It could happen.
So let's talk about Llama 2, which is Facebook's AI model. It's basically a competitor to GPT-4. And the thing that we were finding interesting is the fact that Microsoft is a huge investor in OpenAI, which creates GPT-4. And yet here they are entering a partnership to promote a product that's ultimately going to compete with one of their main investments. Why are they doing that?
I think Microsoft sees Meta as the swing vote, and that is, I think they see their enemy is Alphabet, mm-hmm. and that Meta, with all of their power and consumer engagement with 3 billion people, has probably said, my guess is, so they partnered on the headset or the metaverse. Yep. Microsoft has said, we'll develop software for the metaverse. And my guess is they like and trust each other. And Microsoft is saying, okay, the battle of the war of the worlds here is shaping up and AI is shaping up to be between Microsoft and between Alphabet. Mm-hmm. And so they're probably willing to give up some upside and get Meta on their side. So to me, it's just pick your dance partner. We didn't, in World War II, we weren't especially fond of the Russians, but we had a shared enemy. And so we were willing to make accommodations and kind of let the past be the past, if you will. And I think that's what's going on here. I think that Microsoft and Meta, that is definitely Batman and Robin and chocolate and peanut butter. So, and my guess is Llama is probably approaching it from a different angle, but I think they've figured out a way to say, okay, the incremental power we have as a team is worth some of the reduction in economics.
And then finally, let's just talk about Satya Nadella. So shares have risen 1,000% since his first day on the job. He took over at this sort of big inflection point for Microsoft, and he took over from Steve Ballmer, who was seen by many as a failed CEO. He was behind on hardware products. He was way behind on mobile. And then you mentioned the OpenAI investment, which could be one of the greatest corporate investments ever. And the stock is up 50% this year. Is Satya the second greatest non-founder CEO in history behind Tim Cook? Is he the greatest?
Oh, he's right up there. I mean, first ballot Hall of Fame. Also, a lot of people, analysts, will say it's a little bit unfair that Ballmer doesn't get enough credit, that a lot of the things that Ballmer put in place, Satya took advantage of and registered. The markets were kind of unkind. But there's just no getting around it. Satya Nadella is a billionaire, and he deserves to be. And he's brought one of the things that not only from a business performance, but from a business image standpoint, Microsoft has all of a sudden gone from Darth Vader back to Anakin Skywalker. Microsoft in the 90s, when you were, I don't know, I forget, not born, but Microsoft was the mendacious fuck of tech. Everybody hated them. They were bundling products. They would announce products. They had no intention of launching, just to screw with smaller companies such that no one would buy their product because they'd claim they were coming out with a competitive product. And people couldn't stand Microsoft and were rooting against them. And they have done a 180. They're now seen as good partners. I just don't, back to the notion of why Meta would partner with Microsoft. Not only would Microsoft partner with Meta, because the industry looks at Microsoft now and Satya Nadella as the good guys and good partners. So the cultural shift, the fact that they miss search, they miss social, they miss mobile, and they still are the second most valuable company in the world. This is. I always thought that Reed Hastings was the most underappreciated CEO based on what he had pulled off. The guy, kind of the world's greatest business pivot from mailing DVDs to streaming. But Satya Nadella, he gets a lot of credit and a lot of discussion, but probably not enough. Think about it. This guy, he's right. He and Tim Cook, and what do they have in common? They both come across as humble people. They're both measured. They seem to listen a lot. They both have a certain, I don't know, you just get the sense, like if you could pick a godfather for your child and someone said, hey, how about Tim Cook or Satya Nadella? You'd probably think, that I would trust that person with my child's life. So would you say the same thing about Elon Musk? Would you say the same thing about Mark Zuckerberg? Not at all. So character and the perception of your character and the culture at the company all really matter. But again, probably the best corporate venture investment in history, maybe with the exception of Jack Ma investing in Alibaba, was Satya Nadella and Microsoft's visionary, early, huge investment in OpenAI. The company is firing on all 12,000 cylinders. Everyone talks about IBM's comeback. Microsoft and Apple are really the Genghis and Khan of tech excellence over the last 3 decades. So we talk a lot about income inequality. Satya Nadella deserves to be a billionaire.
So the reason that the stock popped was actually not because of the Llama 2 partnership, but it was because of that Copilot price announcement, $30 per user per month for businesses. Do you think $30 is a reasonable price? Do you think businesses are going to pay for it?
We had a discussion about this off mic. A bunch of folks at Prof G thought it was too expensive, and I thought the enterprise will absolutely sign everybody up for this if it makes them more productive. So I saw it as reasonable. I'm terrible at pricing. I think pricing is one of the hardest things in business. The hardest thing in management is compensation, and the hardest thing in a consumer business is pricing, in my view. But so we were sort of split on it. I thought that an enterprise would absolutely sign up another $30 a month for their information workers, thinking they thought it would make them more productive. But some of the folks thought that was a lot of money. So anyway, the bottom line is we don't know.
Would you ever want to pay for that for our business? I mean, just taking a couple of those features, for example, taking a document, put it through the Copilot, and it turns it into a deck. Is that something you'd be interested for us?
It's a productivity tool I'd be willing to invest in, but first I would ask that people not spend all their fucking time in Mykonos, Ed. Oh, that was good.